Kampfgeschwader is the German name for the Air Force bomber units. In World War II, Kampfgeschwader units were full bomber wings within the Luftwaffe, consisting of 3 bomber groups. This bomber group was the basic autonomous unit in the Luftwaffe in both administration and strategic use. The group would be commanded by a Gruppenkommandeur that would be a major or captain. He would have a small staff including administration, operations, medical and technical officers. One group usually occupied one airfield. The typical aircrafts in the group were the Heinkel 111 and the Junkers Ju-88. The German word Kampfflieger refers to the crews of the bomber wings. The crew operated as a team. Each member was mutually dependent on the others, and each had a vital part to play in ensuring that the aircraft reached its target, dropped its bombs, and safely returned back to the base. The crew all shared the same experiences and dangers. Each aircraft had a pilot, an observer or navigator who also acted as the bomb aimer, a wireless operator, a flight engineer, and a gunner. The pilot of the bomber crew flew the aircraft throughout the operation and coordinated the actions of the other crew members. He was the captain of the aircraft regardless of his rank in relation to the other crew members, and the most important crew member as well. He was responsible for the lives of all the crew and the aircraft in the air. If an emergency evacuation of the aircraft was necessary, the pilot had to stay at the controls and be the last to leave. The navigator was responsible for keeping the aircraft on course at all times, reaching the target and then the home base. He had to maintain a high level of concentration for virtually the whole of the flight, which could be up to 6 hours. The navigator was also responsible for aiming and releasing the bombs. He took control of the aircraft when it was on its bombing run. He would lie flat in the nose of the aircraft, directing the pilot until the bombs were released and the bombing photograph was taken. The photograph was the proof that the operation had been completed, which meant the crew could count it towards their total number of operations carried out. The bomb aimer could act as a reserve pilot in an emergency, as he would have received some flying training as well. The flight engineer controlled the aircraft's mechanical, hydraulic, electrical, and fuel systems. He also assisted the pilot with takeoff and landing. In an emergency, the flight engineer would also be needed to give accurate fuel calculations. He was also the reserve bomb aimer and helped to look out for enemy fighters. On the ground, he also liaised with the ground crew, who were responsible for servicing and maintaining the aircraft. The wireless operator transmitted all messages to and from the aircraft to their base. He had fewer duties than the other crew members, as operations were generally conducted in wireless silence. However, he also served as the reserve gunner and addressed any minor emergencies in any part of the aircraft. If the aircraft got into difficulties, he had to send out positional signals. If the aircraft had to ditch into the sea, he had to remain at his post to send out a distress signal to improve the crew's chance to being located and rescued. The last crew member was the gunner. His main duty was to advise the pilot of enemy aircraft movements to allow him to take evasive action and to defend the aircraft against enemy fighters. Bomber development was oriented toward short-range aircraft as they could be produced in greater numbers rather than long-range aircraft, something that put the Luftwaffe at a disadvantage as early as the Battle of Britain. The bomber arm was given preference and received the better pilots. Later, fighter pilot leaders were few in numbers as a result of this. As with the late shift to fighter production, the Luftwaffe pilot schools did not give the fighter pilot schools preference soon enough. The Luftwaffe leaders argued that it was still an offensive weapon and its primary focus was on producing bomber pilots. This attitude prevailed until the second half of 1943. Bomber crews were filled with younger pilots too quickly. These younger ones had to learn in the field rather than entering a frontline post fully qualified. Training of formation leaders was not systematic until 1943, which was far too late, with the Luftwaffe already stretched. The Luftwaffe thus lacked staff officers to set up new combat units with carefully selected and skilled combat personnel, and pass on experience. Overall, this meant reduced training on operational types, formation flying, gunnery training, and combat training, and a total lack of instrument training. Moreover, Luftwaffe leaders from the start poached the training command, which undermined its ability to replace losses, while also planning for short, sharp campaigns, which did not pertain. In fact, when protests were raised, Hans Jeschonek, chief of the General Staff of the Luftwaffe, said, "First, we got to beat Russia, then we can start training." In 1943 and 1944, there were not enough commissioned pilots and leaders to meet attrition rates. As the need arose to replace aircrew, the quality of pilot training deteriorated rapidly. In the last year of the war, this was made worse by the fuel shortage.